we are moving to the second part of our presentation today. It's a second bunch of participatory tools, and it's observation outcome harvesting. For me, it's the most probably challenging one and most significant change. I do have a lot of slides, but I believe we probably won't be able to cover all of them, but probably for the later you will have the presentation, and maybe at some point that will be useful. So, frankly speaking, I must admit that I have actually limited experience in applying those methods myself, because usually, not because I'm not good at them, but because usually donors just do not ask for them. And frankly speaking, I do not very always have a project that this method could be applied. So we usually apply it more traditional ways, like surveys, interviews, or focus groups. But for example, outcome harvesting could be quite useful for social projects. And I did find, I believe, a relatively good example to explore this with you, but it's not from Ukraine, from the UK, because UK is definitely much more advanced in terms of social projects and unusual projects for me. So, but before we move to outcome harvesting, just a few words about observation, because again, observations is not very often used in type of project I usually evaluate, because this type of method is good for like ethnography or healthcare, the situation where you really can place yourself in the natural environment of the people you try to evaluate, of the project. And usually with a development project, it's not the case. So okay, of course you can ask business just to be the part of this business for a certain time, but it's usually, again, not the case. So it's like the essence of the method comes actually inside the name. So you observe what is happening with the group of your beneficiaries being inside this group. That is why I am saying that it's not very usual method to be used. And I believe that probably Andrei has quite a good experience with this method, because you are working with Roms and Roma, sorry. You probably know better how to use this because you can be in the environment and to observe. But I believe that it's not the same, but sometimes when you use the traditional methods, yeah, like a survey, not a survey, but a focus group or interview, you're doing a little bit of observation. When you are just see people, you try to follow body language, you try to follow reactions. And for example, I have my Danish colleague. He understands Ukrainian, and he can follow the discussion. Of course, he doesn't understand like 100% of the discussion, and no one can assume he speaks Ukrainian because he is pure Danish. But he's very good to be with me during the interviews, because he can do all this observation when I'm conducting interviews. Sometimes it's really help. From your perspective, what are the pros and cons of this method?
Biggest cons would be that it's hard to mingle in the environment in the way that people don't change their behavior, and you have to cover up so to make yourself look like a local.
Yeah.
And it probably takes more time for people to not to notice you, to become as one of those.
Naturally. Yeah, absolutely, because it's very lengthy process. And you actually, not all, as I mentioned, not all contexts are good for this kind of observation, for this kind of method. There are very specific niches where you can use this method, like as I mentioned, for ethnographic or for medical care, when you can be really inside the process. And it's very time and resource intensive. So usually we do not have, I don't know, the longest evaluation I had maybe half a year usually it's 3-4 months, so you just do not have this luxury to be within the situation and just observe the process. So again, as I mentioned, like in my situation, I do not have really a lot of experience in conducting these matters. But in terms of outcome harvesting, it's an interesting method, and you can really use it for social projects. Harvest is this kind of type of like outcome. We call it this harvest. And this is the opposite process from what Mariana explained to you yesterday. So you actually move forward. You do not have defined outcomes from the very beginning. So during this process, you try to understand what really changed. You do not know what changed in advance, because like in our project with labor market, you assume that what perception of the businesses, like labor force, like ability of state employment services to deliver services should change. Here, you do not know what changed. So you try to understand what really changed. Then you try to find evidence of this change. And only after that, you actually try to understand how your project or intervention or program really contribute to this change. So it's actually you are moving backwards. So it's not very often you can use this approach, because very often, why I'm saying that I do not usually use it, because donors very often, like in majority of cases, they do have very particular list of outcomes and impact. Impact usually is not so clear, but still, they ask us to measure concrete outcomes. That is why we just can't go to this journey trying to understand what has happened, because we really need to understand was it happened or not. But it's really participatory method, because you can't explore this method without talking to people, without understanding their stories. This method is relatively new because it was developed only in 2000, but it was quite widely used for different non-government organizations, research centers, think tanks, mainly to understand the changes in behaviors, relationships, like some policies, and literally like soft things that is very difficult to measure in other ways. So what I started with, so how you organize your processes. This is a classical way that you discussed with Mariana yesterday. This is the theory of change, or like a logic model. So it's input, output, outcome, and impact. And I'm sure that is not your case, but when I work, for example, with local NGOs, they are still struggling to distinguish outputs and outcomes. And for example, in Ukrainian, we do not have different words for outcome and output. This is still result. We have only one word, result. And Mariana said yesterday that they use concrete results. I usually use short-term results for outputs, medium-term for outcome, and long-term for impact. And I have a very, I believe it's funny trick. When we are talking about output, I'm always saying this is from English word put, that you put something on your table immediately when you finish your project. This is this type of result you can observe when your project is finished. And outcome, your come, it comes a little bit later. It's still your project, but not as immediate as output. It's definitely, because I am sure that you do understand the difference, but just you can use this example when you're teaching the difference to other people. And even when I work with local authorities, sometimes they also do not understand the difference, and they do not link the input, the activities, with outputs or outcomes. And I say, for example, you can't have this outcome or output if you do not have these activities. And impact is definitely something that goes beyond your project, and you do not have a lot of control over it. So it's good to save the world, but maybe not with with a particular project that cost, I don't know, 100,000 euros. So it was just like a small intervention. So, but the main difference, as I mentioned, between theory of change and outcome harvesting, that you're working backwards, and first you need to understand what are evidence of the change. So actually, what can how can you justify what really changed? What was done to achieve this change? Why it is important? Because, you know, a lot of things can be changed, but you really need to understand, are those things important to your projects or not? And then only after this, if you went through all the steps, you can understand what was really changed and formulate your outcome. So you start without knowing what is the outcome, and then you identify it later. Yeah.
I wonder what are the most commonly used data collection methods to determine like what was the outcome. Like do regular interviews, you could do focus groups, what is the most appropriate method?
Or for a theory of change?
No.
For outcome harvesting. It's usually interviews. Because with survey it will be very difficult. It's usually like numbers, even if you have open questions. But I believe it's interviews and case studies. Because yeah, it could be a focus group, but it will be more probably challenging. You really need to have very homogeneous focus group, and you need to have, how to say, not the same outcome, but the change should be similar. And you don't know this from the very beginning. You can try to use focus group, and then if you see different things that appear, then you need to still probably have additional interview, or if you have one outcome, you can go in this direction. It's very difficult to answer the question because there is no unified approach here. So usually it's very resource intense because it's a little bit vague and you don't know sometimes where to start, but it helps to discover and to make open the views that are not visible from the very beginning. For the projects that are not so obvious, that outcome is not obvious. And I believe that we will have this project to discuss. But it should be also the case when the group of beneficiaries you will be working with, they are quite active and open for you. And I remember we had this discussion. If your beneficiaries do not want to talk to you, that is probably quite difficult to understand, to use this method. And again, you never know if they will if they want to work with you or not. So sometimes, actually, we need to change the approach in the middle of the evaluation. So if it doesn't work, then you need to switch to more traditional methods. So evaluation methodology for your concrete project, it's not a stigma. Sometimes you just need to be quite flexible, but don't forget that you need to agree this with your client, because it could be quite challenging with the donors that if you promise them to have like 5 focus groups and then you move to something else, then you will need to explain why, but not everyone in your donor community maybe knows all this matter, so you need to be very convenient in this regard.
And can I ask one more question?
Yep.
So answer to the question, what was the most significant
most significant changes in other methods?
Okay.
It's a different, yeah.
Okay, I was just wondering who is to decide, like, do we take respondents' word for it, or we have to determine, like, that's, okay, I will ask later on.
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, no, sometimes you just need to, I don't know, be flexible and just feel the project, I would say. So, but frankly speaking, I was never asked by the donor to have outcome harvesting as a method. Really, because as I mentioned, they have outcomes defined from the very beginning. Sometimes it actually depends on the project. Sometimes they do have the methodology almost developed for you. They ask you concretely, so please conduct focus groups, but sometimes they just ask you, especially if it's a tender, if it's an open tender, and this is the way how they select a consulting company. So just to develop your own methodology, and they will see how it's relevant to the project, because usually they provide you this kind of TOR, and you do not usually have a lot of opportunity to ask questions. So you can ask some clarifications, but probably not about all numbers that was in a project. So you can see that, for example, it was 1,000 participants there, but not in many details, so you don't know all results. So you just need to define your groups and suggest the method. Yeah, and it will be quite difficult to explain to the donor that I will try to identify the outcome and I try to justify that the product achieved something. Because the result could be different, it could be even negative. Or it could be the case that you do not achieve really any significant changes, or the changes that were achieved are hardly linked to this particular project. And that will be the disaster for the donor, because they won't be able to prove that they invested money in something that really changed because of their intervention, because attribution is quite important. And again, with the businesses, like with the COVID, for example, yeah, so all businesses, not all, a lot of businesses were in bad situation because of the COVID, not because the project did a bad job. Yeah, but sometimes absence of changes, it's also could be good results. Because, for example, if you evaluate like business support program and you see that your businesses, they did not progress, but they did not fail because of the support. And then you investigate the other group of the businesses who were not involved in your program, and you see that they really failed. So absence of changes in your beneficiaries, it's a good result. Because without support, they would probably bankrupt. So it's not always should be improvement in numbers, in turnovers, in number of employees. Sometimes keeping and safeguarding of the jobs, it could be also results. So in terms of outcome harvesting, there are two different types of principles, so-called the process principles, the principles that you use when you're going through the method. It's like facilitate the usefulness through the harvest, ensure appropriate participation. So you need to be very, inventive with the group when you force them to formulate this outcome. Because I'm sure if you come to the beneficiaries and ask what was the outcome of the project, they won't answer you. So you need to go through this very simple question: what really changed in your life? Did you manage to do better? To what extent? Again, so I don't like this question, did you manage to do better? Because the answer will be yes or no. So again, try to avoid this yes/no questions. So try not to cover everything, because you need to have maybe less results, but to explore them deeply, because otherwise you will be just have bits and pieces rather than the whole picture, and rather than the whole journey to the harvesting. And it will be your experience and the experience of your beneficiaries that will be shared with you. The second part of the principles is so-called content principles that apply to this process. And usually, as I mentioned this already several times, you're talking about social change. You're talking about behaviors, perceptions, understanding, something that is really difficult to quantify. But again, it's not something it's theoretical, but you still need to be able to verify this. It should be some kind of reports or results of your interview, so you need to be able to justify that this change really happened. And then accountability comes, so you need to be sure that this change really happened because of the project, as I mentioned. So businesses are not in a good position, not because the project did a bad job, but because COVID came. Or, for example, I don't know, tsunami, whatever, like disaster. In our case, like the war came, so again, it's very difficult to think about labor market or business support because people just, especially first months, had to survive. If we are talking about the process of outcome harvesting, there are 6 main steps. In our exercise, we want be able to follow all of them because ideally we would need to talk to people, but of course here we can do this. You will have a presentation here in any case. So first you need so-called to design the harvest. You need to review your documentation to find this evidence, and then the very important step, you need to talk to people, to engage with informants, with your stakeholders, with your beneficiaries, and then to check, analyze, and support your findings and actually formulate the outcome. So finally you get to the point you have this harvest. But for me, like harvest, I had just had a challenging evaluations with these agrarian businesses. It's actually time of your evaluation is very important. So we had evaluation mission in the middle of June, or like end of June, where like all agrarians were in the fields. And it was so challenging to have them on board and to talk to them. And literally my colleagues, likely it was not me, but my colleagues were brought by tractor in the middle of the field, this very like a serious man who were like in the process of harvesting, and they were trying to ask, oh, can you tell about this credit program and the credit of this loan you've got? I was like, oh my God, so it was such a wrong timing. So if you have a luxury to schedule the evaluation mission, just keep these small things in mind, because sometimes it can cause you really trouble.
This is also a good opportunity. You literally went to the field.
Yes, yeah, it's good.
They should have helped with harvesting, and then they would
Yes.
be more interested.
Yeah, this is the point how you actually investigate this in the field. But yeah, this is the most enjoyable part for me. I like really to talk to businesses, because if you find the way to explain them, that you do not try to steal any of their secrets, like financial secrets, production secrets, know-how, they're so proud to show you their work. They brought me to the, like, not to the field, but to the plants, show the production, these factories. So they usually very, very happy to share and just to explain what they are doing. So I will try to explain a little bit of each step, maybe not in very, very detailed, because it will take too much time. Actually, outcome harvesting is an interesting method because it has its own web page. You can have, I've uploaded this list of materials you can have after the training school. There is a special web page dedicated just to outcome harvesting, so you can have a lot of materials from there. And also one more resource I like, it's better evaluation. So you will see that majority of my slides came from there, but what is good, it's very concise and very short explanation of every single method, but you can always find there links to proper sources, not the short one just to expand to grasp the essence, but to go to their normal resources and to read a lot. So the first step when we're talking about outcome harvesting, it's the design of the harvest itself. So we try to identify the primary users of this process and who were involved and who should help us to actually to find this harvest, to identify this outcome at the end. It should not be a big group because, as I mentioned, one of the principles not try to cover everything. So it should be really a small group when you are talking, when you can get these results and to understand what really happened. And then you need to develop those questions. You need to understand what kind of questions you need to ask your audience. So you need to understand what kind of effect happened. For example, what effect this program had on the grantees. What effect of, I don't know, promotional campaign for local elections, because just UK just went through the elections, so it's very alive in my memory. You need to understand what kind of social actors are involved and how the interventions influence them. Then, so actually, you just make so-called like first snapshot. You understand who is really involved. Then you need to understand how and where you can find the evidence. So you review your documentation. In our case, it will be just a short description because we can't have because the whole report just takes 30 pages. So I'm not so cruel just to force you to read 30 pages today in the afternoon. So you just need to understand where can you gather this data, what kind of documentation. It could be, again, scripts of the interviews, it could be reports, it could be results of the individuals' interviews of the focus groups. So try to find a way where you can get the data, because it could be the case that not only reports are available, it could be the case that, for example, the project had midterm evaluation and they already had some interviews conducted. So you can have business cases from there, you can have scripts of interviews, or for example, I don't know, if we're talking about trainings, the project itself could conduct follow-up survey to understand the results and how people were very happy with the training. So here at this stage, you try to understand the description of the change. Who changed, what specifically did the social actor to do differently, when, where. So this is actually, I like this way of asking questions. So what would you do differently? Because people are a little bit nervous when you ask them what was wrong or what was good, because they actually do not like to answer a question what was wrong, because they assume you ask them to criticize the donor. Oh, never. They don't like to criticize the donor or the project. So just ask what was done, what would you done differently. And from this you can understand, are they happy with this or not?
I would say make it longer and involve more people, even the most common answers.
Yeah, so no. Yeah, sometimes it's even more longer, but you know, you can actually, with the questions what was wrong, you can block the whole conversation, because you know, it's not necessarily what's wrong, but probably from that experience you could do it differently, quicker, I don't know, to have more people on board. It doesn't mean that it was wrong. But yeah, from my experience, again, people do not really want to criticize, especially if they're in a group. If it's focus group, if you have competitors, yeah, or if you have both, like for joint interview. So you need to be careful with this type of questions. So you need to understand why this change was important, you know, because for you it's actually important to understand what was the important things that happened to your audience. So if the project already ended, I don't know, a couple of months ago or even a year ago, this is actually the best time to ask about impact. But a lot of things could happen during this time, during this couple of months or a year, and for people it will be quite difficult to understand them, because you will be asking about the attribution later. So try to focus their attention on the smaller number of changes, but the most important for them, something that they really remember. So if they do not remember this change and you need to ask a lot of additional questions, probably it's not your outcome to dig deeper. Yeah, I'll talk about this, like the change should be verifiable. You need to talk about attitudes, beliefs, behavior, because I have quite a challenging task at the moment, because we have in Ukraine mediators and who tried to deal with the conflict as well. And they asked me to develop evaluation guide, how you evaluate the impact of dialogues. And this kind of dialogues could be like changes in religious belief, peace mediation, or very difficult things. So I still didn't start because I'm still struggling with it. It's very difficult because it's not possible to quantify, but I believe that probably outcome harvesting plus you would be quite a good way to approach this, because in dialogues there are so many different factors that influence your process, and it's very difficult to ensure this attribution and to understand really was it your result or not. And actually this step 3, it's what the answer on your question, so how you would approach, it actually could be different, as I mentioned, but the most important thing here is that you need to engage with social actors. It could be interviews, semi-structured interviews, it could be focus group. Again, you need to avoid bias, you need to have as many open-ended questions as possible. You can even actually follow the survey. As I mentioned when we were talking about surveys, if you suggest people to provide more information and they open and they would like to give you more information, sometimes they allow you to contact you after you have the survey, maybe you can use this information and just follow them up. So you do not really use your survey as a tool for collecting data for outcome harvesting, but you use it as an initial step for having this information who you should contact later. So after you just define these initial changes and you talk to people, you need to understand how you verify your outcomes. So you probably need to talk with another people, or you need to have additional reports or whatever. So there are a variety of methods you can use there, but you need to be sure that you can justify this outcome. So for example, it could be even the results of the survey after the training, justifying that this happened, or it could be record of the interview. Sometimes people allow to record. It could be, I don't know, interview somewhere published in a newspaper and people are happy to share this story. So you just need to be sure that you really have this information to be proved. Otherwise it will be difficult to sell this result to the donor or who ordered you this evaluation. Analyzing, interpreting, so it's afternoon already. So you need to understand this change really, to understand was it really important, how you can classify, if you can classify, because sometimes it's not possible to classify. It's good if you can understand this change, if it's purely individual level. If this change just happened for this particular individual, it's good, but most likely your project will be costly, but maybe not super costly, but it depends how much money you spend for it. And if this change happened just for one individual, then you probably can have this question, was it really efficient in terms of money spent? And you try to understand if it's really could be the general case, if you can have this outcome for other group, if you can have a database of people who were involved, and you can assume if you have this one example that it could be applicable for other people or for similar group. So sometimes you can need to have a mapping between changes, for changes and evidence, and then you can go from there. Sometimes your change could be so significant that it's completely enough. And here you just have all your stuff. You're finishing your result. You're finalizing your outcome. You're coming to the end, and you need to formulate really the outcome of the project. And you need to understand what was happened and was it really happened because of the project. I know that it sounds very theoretically, but we will try to work with this a little bit when we will be talking about this practical case. And this is just for you to have it. It's very widespread picture, but if you're teaching outcome harvesting, that I believe you will be able to do, it's good to have just everything in one picture. And it's really a tree that is standing on those principles and all the steps that you can go. Yeah, it's just in summarizing that you have this iterative process, so you go step by step, you try to understand these hidden changes and causal effects, and you work directly with people. Why it moved? I don't know. So I mentioned this already. When you definitely do not use it, outcome harvesting. If your development agency or your client, whatever, if they do know the particular type of objectives and outcomes, so they won't ask you to use this method. So you just need to justify that outcomes were achieved. It's the way of telling stories and the way of justify those stories. But you can also use it not just for individuals, as I mentioned, but also for groups and communities. It goes beyond numbers, and not too technical and easy to use if you have proper facilitation skills. But for me, the whole story about participatory methods, it's usually how to be a good facilitator, how to be a good moderator of the process. It's very often for the focus group, I prefer to have one more colleagues by my side, because when I'm conducting interviews, it's difficult to make notes. And when I started my career, I was providing translation during the interviews. And then we stopped to do this, not because my English is not so good. It's not so good, but it's enough to translate. But when I'm focusing on translation, I just completely miss the essence of the story people telling me. So I do provide translation, but then I go out of the room and I do not remember a word of the words that we were discussing. So that is why it's not really good when you're translating. So always try to convince your client that you need a professional interpreter. If you have international English just speaking expert on board, because otherwise it will be difficult for you. Yeah, and it's flexible.
Sorry.
So yeah.
What do you mean by translating?
Interpretation. So when I work in Ukraine, so I just and majority of officials that do not speak English. Mm-hmm. So and my partner is English speaking.
Oh, okay. So
in terms of
you're not asking question, you're just translating.
Yes, and I'm asking question, I'm making notes, and I'm interpreting. So it's quite difficult because I'm not an interpreter, not a professional at all. So that is why for me it's very difficult. So it's good to have a professional interpretation on board. It's more expensive, of course, but if you are developing your budget by yourself as an evaluator, be sure that you have this in your budget, because otherwise we will be struggling to ensure so. Yeah. Or you are so lucky that all your beneficiaries speak English. So then you're lucky. It's not always my case. Do you have any questions regarding outcome harvesting? Because I know that, yes, it's quite theoretically.
I had a small comment. Probably it would be very hard to have beneficiaries commit to it, but if you have few beneficiaries doing journaling throughout the implementation of project, I think it would be really great source of information for evaluators to work with, to go through this prompts, they like under the you provide some kind of prompts, they make statements, they write their feelings, and then you go over and see how this change has been taking place.
Yeah, absolutely, you may do this. So, but again, in case if outcome is not defined from the very beginning, so you need to have a quite specific type of projects to use this method. I don't know, does any of you have this experience of using outcome harvesting during your evaluations? No, just
We
a little bit
one
of theory.
time we submitted in the proposal, we didn't win, so we didn't have a chance to use it.
Yes, but it's interesting because I like, for example, I personally like to talk to people and I like to hear their stories. But again, in my experience, especially with development projects in Ukraine, no, because outcomes are defined from the very beginning, and donors don't want you to tell the story. And sometimes it's funny because they want evaluators to be aware about different methods, but when they write TOR, they still ask you for very limited number of methods to be used, like surveys, questionnaires, or whatever, like desk studies before. So, and yeah, but if you really explore the social changes in your societies or communities, it's good to have a little bit of understanding how it could be done. As I mentioned, we will try to do this a little bit, but yeah. It's for me, it was quite unusual, this type of project that is delivered in the UK. They are so keen about all the social changes, and they always use this, we make a difference. This is like a big motto of our organization, we are making a difference. And it could be difference for personal, for the community, for the business, whatever. And the most significant change, it's actually very similar. It's a little bit easier for me, but I'm still, frankly speaking, maybe we can discuss this together when we go through the theory, because it's quite difficult to make a very clear line between outcome harvesting and most significant change, because both methods are about telling stories, about understanding what really happened. So it's actually most significant change for me. It's a little bit easier way because there is no so strictly defined steps how you approach this. So actually here you just try to understand what's really changed. But this is more often used as monitoring rather than evaluation method. But you also can use this for evaluation. So again, it's actually the method how you define what's changed for the stakeholders, for the beneficiaries. And you're again collecting the stories, and stakeholders try to search and to understand the impact. So once the change have been captured, so you try to understand this change, you discuss with your group or with your individuals this change, and the value of this change, how important it was, what really changed in their life, why they consider it important. So there is no how to say strict rule in terms of finding the evidences for this, and it's more flexible way, I would say. But for me, the difference is still quite vague. Most significant change is more applicable for maybe focus groups. You can use this for individuals, but still I think it's maybe broader for the broader group. But again, as an outcome harvesting, it's quite time consuming and resource intense, and you need a robust facilitation. It actually takes a lot of time just to understand, to observe. So there are just three main steps here in comparison with outcome harvesting. You first need to decide the types of stories you would like to collect. So what type of story you are collecting, what practice, what was it, like health outcomes or empowerment or whatever. So just need to define the type of stories. Then you collect the story, and then you try to write the story and explain why the story actually happened. So here we are not really looking for very strong evidence, but still need to justify. Yeah, it's not a comprehensive method. It's, for me, it's very similar to a little bit to a case study, because you can have a very good case study when you identify this most significant change, and then you tell the story. Yeah, it's not a quick method, analysis of stories, different group. Okay, I'm just a little bit tired with all the theory, so I believe so you are. I would like to explore with you one more practical case. It came from the UK. It's not really evaluation, because it wasn't done properly, because just colleagues came to me at the end of the project asking, what can we do here? Because the project came to an end, and somewhere in the beginning it was mentioned that we need to have an evaluation. I was like, okay, but it's a little bit too late to define what kind of evaluation can we have, and they didn't have money to conduct external evaluation. So we decided to have not a proper evaluation, because I was actually internal evaluator, so it wasn't possible to have me for external evaluation. But we decided to have some kind of learning journey, just to explore a little bit what really happened within this project. And the project itself was very, very interesting. It's about so-called Poverty Tools Commission. Have you ever heard of this type of thing? So it's actually, there is this whole network of the Poverty Tools Commission in the UK. It's a situation with when people with a lived experience, people who experience living in poverty, they connected with officials and they connected with business commissioners, and they worked together to explore the roots of their poverty, why it's so, what can be done. They work together to understand the roots and causes, and to explore how policy could better address their needs, how policy could be developed better. And I frankly speaking, I've never heard about this type of projects before, because literally it's real people who lived like in the area. I mentioned that the area I live at the moment, it's quite depressive because it was a mining area and it's very rural. And so they just formed a group of these people with lived experience, and they identified different official, like community commissioners, people who are dealing with, I don't know, housing, for example, like, because in the UK it's quite popular so-called social housing, the house for people who can't afford normal rent, but this is cheaper and they are usually owned by the council or maybe private company, but it's still cheaper than the regular rent. So these groups identified three main topics that people were interested in. They were talking about food and fuel, because this is actually a very big thing in the UK, because very high prices for fuel, and not for fuel, but for all this gas and electricity, and people are literally freezing during the winter because they just can't afford heating, because it's all about gas and it's very expensive. They were talking about, the next group was talking about caring responsibilities, because if you have someone in your family with disabilities and you are a carer, you have very limited access to the labor market, because you need to take care for your family member, and because the UK have very strict rules regarding children. For example, you can't leave your child alone at home overnight till 18 years old. That is why my daughter is traveling with me, because she's 16, but I still can't leave her in the UK because I'm alone here because of the situation, but she can't stay there. And when we arrived and when we were living with a hosting family, I had to go to the Brussels for evaluation. They said, no, we won't stay with her. Why? She's 14, she's absolutely capable. Said, oh, we don't know what can happen. So it could be trouble when you have several kids and they're like, even if they're not with disability, just small kids, you have limited access to the labor market because you need to pick up your kid from school till 10 years old. So, okay, so they have this strict regulation. So, and with health, because of the several, they were talking about health inequalities, and because sometimes, British system of healthcare is also very specific, and people still believe they do have different access in terms of like gender and some inequalities in terms of how you can access care system. So those three groups of were working together, like people who lived in poverty with the civil and business commissioners. They were working together, and they tried to understand the causes and roots of this poverty, and they tried to bring something, just not to overcome the situation, but just try to develop something that will be helpful for the people, for the other people, how to share their stories. So, for example, for the food and fuel group, they had a video like Pride and Dignity in Food. They had a lady who explained how to cook with a limited amount of money and with limited ingredients, and not to use the food bank, because it's not about dignity if you are dependent on a food bank. Caring responsibilities, they developed a letter, they distribute this letter quite widely just to ask different authorities, like for example, tax service or Department of Working and Pensions, just to sign this pledge to go deeper in this problem of poverty and to understand what could be done, and how they also developed so-called call for action letters that distributed among hospitals and NHS systems. So that were like kind of impact they brought. So we have this information, a little bit of more details, and we have two real stories of these. You can just disseminate, and we have two real stories of people who participated in this Poverty Truth Commission. I would like us to spend a little bit of time reading this and trying to understand what kind of method is better. Or we can go through outcome harvesting, or we will go through most significant change. So I would probably, again, I would like to split you into two groups. And one group have one story, and another group have the second story, to make a little bit of difference with the group. And we will discuss and to think what is the method really to explore this project. Because I still feel it's my, I'm usually satisfied with my evaluation, but here I still feel a little bit of unsatisfaction, because I believe I probably could do better how I approach this. I did this learning journey. I wrote lessons learned, what could be done differently, but maybe, I don't know, I could explore these stories more. And it was very difficult. It was very difficult for me to talk to these people, because they're really going through very difficult situation. And one of them they give me a house plant, because it was something, they were just planting these plants, and they just presented me this as a part of the project. And for me it was so thoughtful. I said, as soon as you have a house plant, you have a home. And for me it was very challenging part, and that they started to pity me instead of me pitying them. So but it's interesting. That is why I'm always saying that you need to be a little bit of psychologist when you're talking to people. That is why I never take project dedicated to health, because it's very difficult to talk with people with some, I don't know, health condition, or like I don't know. I even don't want to give you examples, so I just can't handle it. That is why I do not do humanitarian evaluations. Okay, so there are two different stories there. You have one drama story and we have Amy's story. So I would like probably last part for me to do the first story, drama stories, and you to do Amy's story. Are you okay with that? Yeah. Okay, so who would like to be the first group? What story? Yeah. Okay. I was asked to be closer to computer, so please take my seat.
Yes. During the discussion with my group on general
You might just
story.
present a little bit of a story as well,
Yeah.
because they were working with different one.
Yeah, she's a proud mom with a kid. He's 8 years old, and she has special additional needs. That's what we know, and she does a lot of struggles to take care of them. So, yeah, and the benefits of the supports are not efficient for her or for her family. So that's the basic story.
Yeah.
We identify 4 outcomes, and for every outcomes the significant change. First is increased awareness and support, because Gemma gained a great awareness of available support through some Facebook groups. She shared his experience. The second one is improve confidence and voice. Outcomes, Gemma has grown in confidence and has reframed his experience. The fourth is recognition of systemic issues and advocacy for change, because the Gemma recognized some issues in the system of social care and for child protection area. And the last one is fortifying community bonds, or I don't know, is the legally formulation of this.
No, I understand what you mean.
That. Because Gemma engage the sense of community solidarity.
Okay.
This was our common idea.
Yeah, she felt more empowered and
Proof.
sense of ownership of her own issue. That's what we focus on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, because they would be able through this story to tell to other people that it's possible to live a normal life, to go out of the poverty, even having this issue with a kid, and they bring the story to the broader audience. So it's absolutely right.
Yes.
Well done. So, but I understand you went through the most significant change. Why, in your opinion, outcome harvesting is not a proper method here?
Which method?
Outcome harvesting.
Is not.
Yeah, because you went through the most significant change. That is why I assume you thought it.
We consider that this story is not represent only gender, but some vulnerable groups that have the same problems that gender. That's why we choose, but maybe.
Well, to be honest, I'm not sure how to answer this question.
Why we?
From my understanding, outcome harvesting collects these stories and provides this, let's say, data collection instruments that empower people, which offers more work to the evaluation. Because for me, as an expert that uses more quantitative methods, they are very cool. There's no behind the numbers there. I mean, you don't see the humans behind the numbers. So for me, outcome harvesting, when it comes to poverty, it would be good because I can show with my methods in researching poverty and inequality that there are actually humans in those numbers. They're not just numbers, which often gets overlooked.
Yeah, I actually agree that also because it would be very difficult to have a proper outcome harvesting in our situation, but also because probably it was limited change, so to say, and also for one person it could be scaled up, but it's quite difficult, and attribution is very clear here, but there is no actual right answer here because you could use both methods, so it just was your personal choice and limitation you have in this room.
Yes, one of the limitations was the way you don't have a lot of quantitative data.
Yeah, because
this is a descriptive story.
You won't be able to prove your story actually, like what is needed for outcome harvesting. But the argument that it's like individual rather than group, it's not always work. It could be the case, but not necessarily. So it's not the most significant, how to say, element of those methods. So you can use the both of them just for individual change as well. But well done, guys. Okay. And the second group, please. You need to be here near the computer.
Does anyone want to present?
Probably not. You're here already.
Yes, we had the story of Amy Rose. Amy Rose, who's a single mother of 4. She didn't expect it to be in a poverty because once upon a time she was living happily together in a couple, and both of them they could cover the costs for raising the kids. After giving birth to 4 kids, the partner left, and she suddenly find herself in a situation of poverty, not being able to support the raising of the 4 kids. And she's also exposing the way the system is built, that she couldn't find any support, she couldn't find any flexible jobs that could have provided some time to actually invest in raising the kids. Also, the money from the social services, from what we can tell, they are not enough, the minimum wage. And I must also tell you that Amy Rose owns a PhD, and she was working in molecular biology. She has a background in this field, but the employers are not interested now, because now she wants to go back on business, but the employers, they only offer her full-time jobs, and she cannot take the full-time jobs for different other constraints, having in mind for the 4 kids. Also, during their adulthood, she have been diagnosed with being autistic, and she also explains us how the system is not working for neurodivergent people. because also for her category would be nice to have some flexible jobs and adapted jobs to her condition. She also, well, so this is the case, this is the problem. And her needs were to actually find some flexibility and some incomes provided by the system, or the welfare system, just in order not to be, or to be maintained, kept in poverty. And then this Poverty Truth Commission started to be in place, to function. The outcomes, the awareness raising campaigns, and also the bridges between the businesses and the community commissioners. Another outcome is the support provided by the community commissioners. She felt that she was understood, and the commissioners were supportive and caring, and they were bringing the stories on the same table, and in this way the participants could feel that they are not so different, only the opportunities are different. Also, another outcome on a personal level is that she transferred to universal credit, and she's exposing some frustration towards the bureaucratic and the navigation in the system. But in the end, the success in transferring got her back on her feet and also increased her self-esteem, and she gained confidence. What she hopes, so this is a projective outcome, so it's not happening yet, but she hopes, or she aims to see it, is to see a bigger change in the system, and also some policies to be changed in order to create a fairer society for all with less discrimination. So this is the bigger aim and the outcome on a long term. But on a short term, we see her personal experience, this commission, this awareness raising, and some changes in her life by switching from one to another credit.
Okay, good, absolutely right. Any additions from the team or second team or first team?
No, I think that we got you the.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Very well done. You see that despite the stories are different, actually the outcomes are very similar because it's mainly about personal awareness and about personal changes. And here we comes to the situation how the project, how the donor, or in this case the government, can justify that those personal changes are enough to justify money spent. Because actually, I brought you 2 stories, but there were like 6 or 8 of them. And the project wasn't very expensive, but still, it was very personal. And those productive outcomes, yes, that colleagues mentioned, that will probably come or may not come. So, and it's always a challenge when you are dealing with this kind of project. So I didn't actually expect you to go like literally through the outcome harvesting or most significant change, but my idea was just to show you the type of project you can face during your evaluation, and that is quite a difficult one. And the one more challenge, why I wasn't still sure that I did a good job with this evaluation, because if we go to the list of outputs and outcomes officially in the project, I like deliberately didn't put them in your exercise, because actually that was the list of outputs in the project, and for me it was quite misleading, because you see the outcomes you had in the project, but if you go to the project description, they have just the number of people attending the opening conference and the final event. they have like number of engaged stakeholders, and it's actually very difficult to measure those outcomes they really had, because in the UK they have quite strict the guidance, outcome guidance. You know, in our case we have it, and there is no such kind of outputs or outcomes that can cover this type of projects. That is why this kind of working backwards and starting from this, you know, results and trying to understand them, it brings us actually to the situation where we need to update our guidance and to understand what we are lacking there. How can we do a better policy? Because we do not capture actually the most important things in the project. Because we can't calculate number of people attended event, but what does it say us? Actually, not a lot. So it was a little bit like a tricky example, but I just wanted to share it with you because you can have this type of evaluation in your career. And this is it for today. Thank you very much for your patience. You're a very great group to work with. I hope it was a little bit of useful, or at least you will have all the things all together. Yeah, that is, if you have any questions or comments or whatever, feel free to share. And I promise, like 15 minutes, yours.
Thank you.
You're welcome.